Hey, welcome to Thru Port Collective, and we are a group of musicians from widely different backgrounds musically that like to get together. Some of our common interests of synthesizer, though we are also guitarists, bassists, drummers. Um, but to talk about how to make music, we like to nerd out on gear, but also with an emphasis of like how do we actually use it. So today we are talking about like major changes in workflow, switching from DAWs to DAWless and back and forth. And we've kind of covered some of these topics in previous weeks, and we've kind of dove into some of the more specific aspects of it. But we have been wanting to get our buddy Aaron Russell on and really talk through this stuff with him. And so thanks for coming on, Aaron. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see all you guys. Nice to be on and have a setup that allows me to do that for a change.
Yeah. So before we kind of give you a little intro, I know a lot of people already know who you are, but we still want to kind of show off some of your music before we get into it. Let's just kind of say our hellos and what you guys have been up to this week. Marshall, what have you been up to?
My OBX8 will be here on Friday.
Ah,
So I'm super stoked about that right now. And yeah, I've been trying to do some artwork for that track that we played last week that I'm going to go ahead and release on my label.
Nice.
And I think I am going to try and use AI-generated art for that. I think that might be a fun little experiment to try. So, yeah, I've been kind of working on it.
Checking out AI-generated art Facebook group, and I don't know anything. I know very little bit about it, other than it, uses computers, and you are given a prompt to create that kind of stuff, and it's not video. It's all
and the way you enter those prompts can heavily influence like how things turn out, kind of thing. And yeah, I kind of follow a lot of computer stuff, so I kind of know. I've been following that stuff. It's kind of creepy at the same time, but like it's kind of interesting because it's still like kind of early stage. But like, I don't know. I think one day you'll just be able to tell your computer, make me album art that looks like this, and it'll just do it.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I like to look at it because you would expect that, with a computer doing it, like the details would be right, but the vibe would be wrong. But it seems like it's just the opposite. Like they really nail the vibe of the prompt. And you're looking at it like, wow, that looks very familiar. And then you start looking at it like, oh, that's a little bit weird. That doesn't quite work on some of the photos. But that's cool. And you were doing that. You did a video with like a really intense computer generated animation stuff before, right?
Fractals. Yeah, it was all fractals stuff from Mandelbulb 3D, I think is the name of the program. And the funny thing is now you can actually use that in Blender. So Blender is like a 3D design. It's a 3D bit of software that people use to make animations or 3D models and stuff. And you can kind of do some hookups to make it work with Mandelbulb. I think it's built into the latest beta, I think, actually. But anyway, that stuff's really cool. Yeah, doing the fractal stuff. Obviously, at the fractals, you have almost no control over what it looks like because it's all mathematical.
Mm-hmm.
But whereas the AI, you're doing the prompts, and you get something that's approximate to what you put in, I guess.
Yeah. So, there's one or two TED Talks with Mandelbrot on it. Where he talks about how he came up with that stuff and the mathematics behind the Mandelbrot sets. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. If you guys, anyone's interested in that, look that up because it's crazy.
After I saw your video on that, Marshall, I went and looked it up. Because you had showed it, I guess, on the GeoSense show.
Yeah, I think we did. Yeah,
I think you did. Yeah, it was kind of back when I was first watching, so at least a couple of years ago. But yeah, I was really inspired by that. I went and checked out the Mandelbrot.
Yeah, and that track that I made for that it's a lot of Korg Legacy Collection stuff like M1 and all that stuff. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
How you been, Tim?
I've been good. It's been a busy week and kind of a variety of stuff. I played a recording session last week, midweek, and then Friday night I played with country artist Steve Wariner on the Grand Ole Opry. And then then Saturday I was doing electronic music again, kind of all over the board. And then I have a gig coming up at the Virgin Hotel. They're going to do a little synth night, which is cool. They're going to have 6 artists on, and we're going to kind of take turns playing tunes, basically. But so I decided I wanted to get a rig together for that, and something pretty small. So I've been working on that, and I need to be writing music for it. And I kind of got started doing that with. So I'm going to take out Machine Plus. I don't know, you probably can't even see it anyway, but Machine Plus, and then the KeyStep Pro for sequencing, and at least a little ability to do some keyboard playing if I want. And then I bought this new to me rack case. Yeah. And so I'm putting modules in it. I bought a bunch of modules, and so I have learning curve and and a lot of music to write at the same time. I definitely threw the gauntlet at myself. So I have 2 weeks now to pull it together. Hopefully that'll be enough time. So yeah, I'm excited about it. And a couple of these modules are cool. This Tone Star thing, like we were talking about that before. It's like a 2600 vibe. It's not exactly, but it's kind of got the vibe of that. But anyway, that's what I've been up to.
How do you like Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just thinking I got an OBX8, but today we were tracking with my band, the Penn Jones Conspiracy, over at Ben Jackson's studio, East End studio, and he's a synth lover as well. So I took it over there so he could drool, and so maybe we could use it on a track somewhere. I was just thinking, I'm going to take it and let him. So he's got it right now. It's over at his studio. I'll see him in the morning, and we'll resume. We got 7 tracks, mostly done. So I'm pretty excited. We'll have a record out. We'll have a full-length record coming out soon. So
sweet. Well, just real quickly, I said with the fatigue and stuff, haven't been spending a whole lot of time in here, but I've been playing a lot more guitar, and so that's been great. Just on this Cole here, this orange guitar, where it is no, that way, yeah. That's a buddy's boutique handmade guitar. It's really great sounding, but I swapped the pickups on that for him, and had the fortune, just as Ben did there, to hold on to it for a while and play it and enjoy it. So I, not wanting to really sit around in here, I kind of pulled some stuff out into the living room. So I made a mess of it, and I redid 2 of my pedal boards, just sitting on the ground and moving stuff around, and we got some different cables and things like that. So that's been a fun little project, and I've been kind of back at it today with the plug-in stuff and presets and development kind of things. So got to keep going on that. But Aaron, man, let's see. I remember meeting you and Marshall, what year would that have been? 2018, I think.
It's all a blur.
Yeah.
Yeah, or 2019 maybe. 18 and 19.
There's a 2-year gap in there that I just totally forgot.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, anyways, it's been a minute. But then we were all 4 of us have at one point or another been part of Team VUS on our friend Jamie of Geosynth's synth show. So if anybody hasn't seen that, it's called Synth Show, and it'll be on the Geosynths channel. But tell us a little bit about yourself. What your music is, and then also we'll play a little bit after that.
Well, I like long walks on the beach at sunset. My favorite
and that's
colors
why we love you so much.
with the synthesizers, he takes them up.
Yeah.
Long walks.
And that's why he can't get any dates.
Yeah, I guess the condensed version of my musical journey would be I started with GarageBand, remaking Final Fantasy music back in 2005. And, I just kept pursuing it and it started from just messing around with something to becoming an expression, like a form of therapy, and so it became more and more a part of my life, and I put more time and energy into it. It ebbs and flows as I do, and eventually got into using hardware, I think in 2017, and that's dramatically increased the level of output that I've had, because I find the hardware very inspiring. So
Well,
I don't know how far into detail and how many different tangents you want to go on, but I mean, I could go on that topic for 2 hours.
well, so at least since I've known you, you've been pretty deep into hardware for most of that time, or at least from the beginning of the time that I knew you. And then at one point you said, "Oh, I'm doing everything with UVI and in the box now." I was like, "What?" But actually, you've had a pretty long history of doing that way, also.
Yeah, over 10 years, strictly in the box. I remember in 2015, I got a TR8. I think that's the right one, not the 8S. It was before the 8S. The TR8 and a Blofeld, and I was trying to multi-track with just the Blofeld and the TR8, and I kept running into the limitations of the Blofeld, and I didn't know how to program anything. I was just using presets, and I was like, okay, well, that's a fun experiment. I spent a few weeks doing that, and then I either sent those back or sold them, and then went back inside the box until I think what did it was I watched a really nice sounding demo of a Prophet 6, and I just couldn't get that sound out of my head. I was like, man, if I could have that sound, and if I knew how to create my own version of that sound, that might change everything. And that's just the way it went. Now I've got really expensive gear, and it's really keeps the outlet going. That was one of the main frustrations too, which we'll probably get into when we discuss workflow, is I found that using the software itself, good to see you, Inky. The software itself never inspired me. I always had to bring my own inspiration and passion to it.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm not in a passionate place, I just don't go anywhere. Whereas with the hardware, anytime I sit in front of it, it itself inspires me, and then I bring whatever state I'm in to that inspiration, and then something happens. If that makes sense. So,
well, just briefly, what does your current rig look like?
my most recent video is a really good representation, which you can kind of see I did have this big giant road case that I had it all in, but I realized, okay, I can't possibly move that on my own once I fill it up. So now I got 3 different smaller ones, but they're still in a stack. I'm trying to rack mount everything
So let me
for
see here.
a couple of different reasons, but the most recent video that I uploaded on my channel shows you pretty much everything I'm working with. So on the top is an SE3X. Below that is my new secret weapon that I haven't told any about. That's a fully loaded Omega 4. Below that is a System 1M, and then below that's an Analog 4. And then on the desk is Operation Overlord stereo overdrive pedal and a Cubase. And then I've got also in that rack-mounted tower you're seeing on the left is a audio interface, Mac Mini, MIDI hub kind of thing, what is that? MIDI Solutions T8, I think. And then I also got a rack-mounted power strip.
And you also use a lot of pedals. I know you've been a big fan of the Strymon Dig, and
oh yeah, can't go wrong with Strymon. But so that it's kind of, and I mean, it's constantly evolving, but I'm always trying to find a balance between minimalism and utility. And I really like where I'm at now. And I learned a lot when I did the projects where I was making the music for games, which I did the survival horror music, and I did the RPG music, and then I did the sci-fi music. But I found with the pedals, it's hard to, okay, you can work on something with the pedals, but then if you want to work on a second track, you got to make darn sure that first track is pretty well done, because you're going to move all the dials and the knobs and the switches on the pedals when you go to the second track. So I got more comfortable using Soundtoys Echo Boy, which I've had since probably 2015, to where I can use that well enough that I don't feel like I'm missing the pedals for delay, which delay is one of my most used effects. I just love delay. And then using the Valhalla reverb plugins, I feel like that does well enough. So I haven't been using the pedals except for drums, because I have yet to find a plugin that gives me the same warmth and grit that a proper pedal does, as a proper overdrive pedal. I mean, I spent months looking for a plugin that sounded as good as a pedal, and I just couldn't find one. So I'm like, okay, we're gonna keep using a pedal, and I just kind of do a set it forget it approach, and maybe, mess with the overdrive level or something.
Yeah.
But the pedal, the texture of the beats that I have and what I'm doing, I just don't know how to get that without a pedal. And to me, I can really hear it in there, because I'm so deep down that rabbit hole that it's like every little nuance is a huge difference to me when I'm doing that.
Well, yeah, I mean, overdrive is is my country.
You probably know even more about that.
Very
if I move that knob, from 6 o'clock to 7 o'clock, that might be a little too much. So I got to dial it back, and there's a whole lot of things involved. Especially you guys have amps in there and the pedals, and that's much more complex. I'm just going straight from the outputs of the raw signal into the pedal, and then back into the interface. So
this is one of the nice things about working in the box, because the computer's regulated basically no matter what. You pull up plugins, they're always going to sound the same. Been watching, I've got a Furman up here on my little rack, and most of the time voltage in here is like about 122, and let's see if I can pull this. You can actually see
it's a little hot. 122.
Yeah, it runs pretty high here. I mean, if I'm got a lot of stuff on, it might settle down to like 117 or so, but since it's been crazy hot here, everybody's got their air conditioning on. It's dropping from the 120s. I've seen it as high as like 126 in here.
Whoa.
And I saw it as low as 109 earlier today.
Oh,
so
wow.
Tells you how much how much load the system is under with the heat and everybody running their AC on the street. So kind of crazy. And that definitely to the point that Aaron was making is like, it's these things all affect everything. And like my amps, like you change 10 volts, that really changes the way the amp sounds and the way that it feels when you play it. So it can, there are some advantages to that in the box, finding some of those solutions in there.
You can have the preset, and you flip a button, and bam, you get back to that sound that you may have spent 6 hours tweaking to discover, but then you hit the save button, and it's there forever.
Yeah. There are some venues that I used to play that, go in there, and at certain times of the day or certain days of the week, like the sound would be terrible, both, from whatever it was, weather, and then how much, what the AC level was like, or I mean the, electrical, the voltage was coming in, and other days it was just amazing sounding, and you could just kind of track it with what the power usage was or how humid it was, really affecting live sound a lot. So it really got complicated with live sound. With recording, at least you have a little more control over that, like if you're doing it acoustically and at home. Well, let me pull this up here. Hey, quickly, just to experiment, since I don't know how all this works yet. Let me know before this comes up. Are you hearing the music right now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So, by the way, let's do that again. Let me pull it up, because as Marshall was pointing out, this intro is amazing. Just that.
It's the best.
So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. Or actually, do you want to tell us a little bit about this track first?
Sure. So this was one of the tracks that I put together as I was putting together my basically an album dedicated to survival horror games. And the inspiration for that album was the games that I grew up playing, like the Silent Hill games, the Resident Evil games, primarily those two, because the Silent Hill games have always, the first four were composed by Akira Yamaoka, and he's become famous in survival horror and Silent Hill circles because he has a very specific sound. He does really well, and it takes those games all to another level. If you replace that composer, the games lose a lot of the magic that they had. Anyway, so that's a deep well of inspiration for me, and so I was kind of using that to make these. And so making an album thinking with game music in mind, like, okay, I want music that'll work for the different scenes that you might have in a survival horror game. So this is like, okay, this is where basically if you have a level where the character essentially enters hell itself, what would that sound like? And then I crafted a piece of music, and then I found, knowing the games so well, like, well, this reminds me of this spot in this first Silent Hill game, so let me do some footage of that. And I recorded me walking around, on a computer, and put together the video. So just part of the fun of the project for me was making these videos at the same time. Just to do fun stuff and get real deep in there.
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to do it. A great way to look for inspiration to compose something too. I know you had done some also with I think it was Metroid, and I gotta say, like, so a lot of the original 8-bit Nintendo stuff was my childhood, and my favorite song out of any of the video games was the end of Metroid, like when you beat the game. At the end, but the problem is that you only heard it when you beat it, so it was kind of a bummer because that epic
before
composition,
the internet.
yeah, you couldn't hear it, and then you hear it like, man, that song sounds really great, but I never got to really hear those. So let me pull this up here, and we're just gonna listen to a minute or so of it. it's hard to back out of that. It sounds so good. And I think a lot of what defines your music is those big, fat, warm tones, the really nice ambience, and it just kind of billows and has that just nice, that big pillowy sound. And so this was from one of your projects, which is Impurfekt, and then you also have Point Surrender. We'll play that maybe at the end of the show, some Point Surrender. But how would you differentiate the two? What are the two goals of these projects?
As I think I mentioned before we started the stream, Impurfekt has a lot of variety to it, and I started to feel like, yeah, thanks, Synth Addict. I wanted to do something with a lighter tone and a different energy, but I didn't feel like it fit well into the kind of the world I created with Impurfekt and the following that I had accrued with Impurfekt. And I had done like an EP kind of matching the tone, well, maybe one or two EPs under Impurfekt. But I wanted to go even further, and I wanted it to be primarily hardware based.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, this is a good opportunity to start a side project. I've been thinking about a side project for ages, but never did it. But that's when I came up with Point Surrender. Is actually, I had an album under Impurfekt called Point Surrender, but it had a different sound than Point Surrender has. But Point Surrender is based just trying to express kind of the, I can't remember if it's, I guess it would be the yin versus the yang, but I can't remember which one of those energies is the female softer side. Mm-hmm. But it's the softer side of my soul versus Impurfekt, which tends to be more the heavier and harder and the gritty, kind of the darker spectrum.
Yeah, I've enjoyed the contrast, the Impurfekt stuff being a little more brooding and dark, and the Point Surrender being a lot kind of softer, melodic. In fact, I've listened to a lot of the Point Surrender because I've got the albums on my phone, and so for walking and exercising, like when you want to think through some stuff and have something that kind of like just kind of brings you into the right place, that music is wonderful for it.
Yeah, and I'm if any of the brooding and darker tones get into Point Surrender, it's totally by accident because I don't want that to happen. But I found once or twice where I'm like, this is maybe a little darker or colder than I want, but it works, so I'll leave it there. And also I'm the same person that's creating patches for both projects, so I think sometimes the pad sounds might overlap a little bit just because I do like those big, warm, thick washing type pads. And then the chord structures I often use, D sharp or F sharp. So some of those notes that are considered like the sad notes that people will say, well, what are the sad notes on a piano? And somehow I ended up using a lot of those anyway, just because, I don't know, I like the way they sound.
I think we've all learned that D minor is the saddest of all keys, right?
Yeah, that's the one.
Lines intertwining. Well, that's a great setup because we wanted to kind of explore some of these issues like changing workflows. So in part, the process of changing workflows, and that's something that you've done, Aaron. Also, I think all of us have at some point have kind of had to change the way that we've done stuff, or we've experimented to try other ways of doing things, but also some of the lessons learned in spending a great amount of time doing it one way and then going to a whole nother way, and that we can make some of those comparisons. So I don't know, guys, where do we want to start with this? Like what area of that?
I think my screen is frozen.
I think you're frozen too.
I've been like, talking enough, so I was going to let somebody else.
Tim hasn't moved in a long time.
Literally, I know, it was just funny. I'm like, Still,
That's working now.
Yeah,
I
it's
know
good.
mine's working because the sun's been slowly creeping up my face.
Yeah, you have this one strip of sunlight, yeah, that's moved from your jaw now up to your like mouth.
It's started out down here.
Yeah. Well, who wants to feel that?
I mean, are you referring, Chris, to? I mean, I guess one place I could say as well, the one consistent aspect has been a DAW has always been involved from day one in the way that I work. So everything else kind of moves around that, and I think that gives me a little more freedom because the way that I enter the MIDI notes, the way that I mix it, the way that I manage and master a track, that hasn't changed in 15 years for me.
So when you're doing, so like one of your last big projects was the Polyphonic modular setup, which I believe a little of it lives on in my Eurorack now.
Oh, okay.
I just tell people I bought a dope for VCA off some guy on Reverb. And I started looking at his other stuff. I was like, this guy looks familiar. Where's he at? Oh, he's Northwest. Wait, what's his name? Aaron Russell. Oh, I know this guy.
Wow, that's crazy.
It is crazy. It's a small world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I left him some good feedback. He was a great seller, so you can all have confidence that. So
I have a perfect seller rating on there. Over I'm over 400 transactions by now. I don't know.
So what I was getting at is like you had that modular Eurorack rig, and what you're saying now is that because I kind of got the impression, and maybe this is wrong, that you were basically just doing modular synthesis, and the DAW at that point was just kind of a tape player, a tape recorder. Were you doing MIDI during that time, or I mean, how integrated was that Eurorack setup with your DAW? Was MIDI handling all that stuff, or were you just sitting there doing it yourself, and then it was just being recorded as if it were a tape recorder?
The DAW was sending all the MIDI was in the DAW, and then I had I can't remember what it's called now. A really nice polyphonic, multi-part MIDI CC interface.
Mm-hmm. It was like one of the Polyend or Dopefer or
Polyend numbers, Poly something 2, and I can't remember now.
Yeah.
They use Poly in the names of all this stuff.
Yeah, because I had the original version of that, and the 2 had the display on it. In fact, we were showing Marshall after one of the shows that module.
Yeah, I mean it's a superb module, and it was a great way because what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a ton of filters and to be able to have 4 separate monophonic voices, or have one polyphonic 4 oscillator voice, and then I would. And depending on how I had it plugged in, I could track, different ways. But I'd send MIDI to that, and then record the parts out of that. And I think for the most part, well, eventually I did start getting some effects, and I had 4 different delays. And I think I had considered getting a spring reverb, but I found that for nice stereo reverbs in Eurorack is just a real pain to go down that road, and even to go stereo in Eurorack is a real pain. So I just said, okay, I'm good. Reverb is definitely going to have to be in the box, but I wanted something ultra flexible, and it was certainly ultra flexible. The problem was if you're trying to just get tracks done and move on to the next track, it's like, okay, well, these sounds are never coming back. So I've got to really be committed to it. And so that the flexibility as far as production was a big hindrance, whereas the flexibility in that you can create any sound there's an infinite variety that can be had from Eurorack, but reproducing that sound later is almost impossible because there's so much variety involved. So there was a big trade-off there, and I kept bumping into that trade-off, which is why I'm not using that system anymore. As much as I love the system, and it's so tempting to go back to it.
Yeah, it's a whole different workflow when you know that you've got to capture everything right then and finish the piece. You know,
and sometimes you'll turn it on the next day and it doesn't sound right, and either it has to warm up first to sound right, or you have to just nudge a knob a little bit and suddenly it sounds right again. I mean,
yeah,
and you got to sit there and like follow it all out.
Yeah, it's capturing lightning in a jar, you know, really, which is the exciting thing about it.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it.
Yeah, totally. Yes. But yeah, it's a whole different way of working, as where you can pretty much be guaranteed when you pull your session back up in your DAW that everything's right there and everything's cool. But like the other thing is some kind of wood nymph or something that just runs around and you're trying to capture it, you know. Yeah, it's exciting that way, huh?
Yeah, it didn't seem, you know, modular seems to be the really variable part of this, because even with, I mean, we're just talking about how amps can sound different. You know, I've got all vacuum tube amps and the wall voltage, and things are, you know, kind of, they're very organic and they're always changing a little bit. But when it comes to recording guitar tracks, it hasn't been that big of a deal to kind of go back and retrack something. I mean, now these days with plugins sounding so good, there's not a whole lot that actually track with the amps, the real amps. But it didn't seem like there was that much problem until, you know, getting into modular or semi-modular stuff. Like even the polysynths, like, you know, they're pretty well power regulated. You pull up a preset, so you know it's exactly where it's supposed to be. But then it's when you go to, you know, your modular and things like that it starts getting a little bit dicey. Even modern stuff like the Matriarch, I find like, I mean, I'm definitely guilty of like finding a really great sound and just doing really small variations on that sound forever. But like sometimes you pull it up and you're like, well, that's not what I remember from yesterday, you know?
Yeah.
What has been your experience, Marshall, as far as like that part of reproducing things? Have you had any problems with the analog or hardware side? I think we could probably eliminate the digital hardware from that equation, but the analog hardware, do you have any issues with that?
Luckily, most of the analog stuff I have is still pretty new, and they have the ability to save the presets that you make, other than like the 2600 or the MS-20 Mini that I have. Those
Model
two,
D.
you can't. And the Model D. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that one. I have the Boog too. I got the Behringer Model D, but I haven't pulled that out in a while.
The Boog.
You don't keep them in the same room, do you?
No. No.
Cats
Marshall,
and dogs.
it's Bogue. Bogue.
Oh, sorry. Boog. Well, it's all wrong anyway, so just call it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Perfectly wrong.
Perfectly wrong. Yeah, so and I don't use those that often. The 2600 I've been using a lot more, but I pretty much, like lately I've been using a lot for bass in my live rig. And once you've got that kind of dialed in, you kind of just don't touch it. So I haven't had too many issues or situations rather where I'd need to reproduce something exactly. So at least not yet. You guys, like, especially you, Tim and Aaron, you guys, you know, with your modular stuff, it's like, I don't know how you guys do all that. And because that's one of the things that drives me crazy is like, I want to be able to come back, because I work on a bunch of different stuff. Like, I don't always sit down and just start to finish and get something done. Sometimes I've got 3 or 4 things kind of cooking. And if I had to come back, I just don't see how you could do that with your modular stuff. You pretty much can't, right? Like Aaron said.
Right.
And you just got to kind of do it.
I think you got to push through, and while the iron is hot, you got to cross the finish line or whatever it takes. Yeah, that's just the quirkiness of that approach, and it's kind of the romance of it. It's really cool, and it forces you to work in a different way. Both of them are valid, obviously, but it's interesting. And so sometimes I'll leave stuff patched. I'm sure Aaron, you do too. Until you're hopefully done, and I'll leave stuff on even. I'll just leave my whole system on for a couple of days if that's what it takes. I don't think that hurts the electronics as long as it's not getting super hot in your room.
No, it's totally
so it's
fine.
Okay. Yeah. Aaron, what are your working methods for that?
Well, you guys are kind of touching on it. I found the ideal workflow in working with Modular for me was more, okay, I'm basically going to compose a track that I'll essentially build the whole track, well, in one of two ways. Most of the ways would be it's kind of like a jam where these are the patches and I've got them sequenced in the DAW, and then I make notes at certain points in the arranger of the DAW that says, okay, at this point, start moving this knob from 3 o'clock over the next X amount of bars to 4 o'clock. And I would just kind of rehearse over and over. And a lot of the videos that I had done where they're me manipulating things while it's playing and recording is me doing exactly that, building a track, practicing the knob movements, and then, maybe over a 2-day period, just doing that over and over and slightly modifying it here and there. And then recording it, and then that's it, it's done. So some of my albums are kind of dedicated more to that approach because as Tim was suggesting, it's once you got that patch, you kind of want to leave it alone, and you know that you're not going to be able to get it back. So it kind of forces you into that striking while the iron is hot. And for me, that's more of a jam style approach, which is a totally different mindset and workflow. And I think it's a really powerful tool to have in your arsenal as a musician. And some of you other guys can probably attest to it. The mood of just kind of jamming and working with the flow of something versus the clinical approach of building each part separately and then dialing it and saving it, working on something else, coming back later, tweaking that. And that's totally what Marshall's used to and what I was used to in the box for over a decade. You cannot do that with a modular approach.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think that's.
I don't know how you would. I just don't think you can't really do that. So that's why when I'm trying to be productive and make a lot of tracks and put together a lot of things, okay, the modular is just not really suited for that purpose. It's the kind of the wrong tool for the job, unless you're Junkie XL or whatever his name is, and you've got walls worth of modular. Okay, I'll just do all these things, and then by the time I get back to this one, these all patches are still going to be there. So you might redo one patch every day, but you've got 16 patches going, so it kind of gives you this passive preset memory as you go through it slowly. And you can always go back to that one or that one because you haven't changed it out yet, or that's like Candyland synth heaven approach. But it's going to be a while before I get there.
Talk about hardware preset, right? It's literally just
like the old CS80 where you lift the top and you've got them all dialed in manually on the little sliders.
One thing, let me kind of come at it from a different angle, or kind of conversely against it. I mean, are there? So I would think if I were tracking guitars, let's say heavy guitars or something. And it's a distorted amp, and I'll be doubling them up, hard left and hard right. And you kind of want to do things that are going to be complementary or pretty similar, but with just little variation, so there's a nice stereo field. So not a big deal if you come back and the wall voltage is a little bit different or something. You're still in the ballpark. And then I was thinking about with synth tracks, I mean, there's some really complicated patches, like when you start getting into lots of modulation where, you exhale too much and, the knob turns or something. I'm being hyperbolic there, but what I'm saying, like where there's some very fine tuning of things, an FM ratio on there that's just really dialed in, and that's hard to get that back. But for most of subtractive synthesis, I mean, is it really that critical that exact setting? Because you aren't double or triple taking things a lot of the time. So could you come back and reset up a patch and it'd be like it's in the ballpark? It's really close. Especially if you're I don't know. So
I
have like a little. Go ahead.
I have kind of an example where I did kind of run into that, and that was when I sold my little fatties when I was like in my 20s, and then I ended up getting them again. And there's a specific patch in one of the tracks that I made years ago that I wanted to recreate, and I was able to get it in the ballpark, but it was never this. I was never able to even dial that in, and that's an analog synth. But without the preset, and it could have been even just differences in the synths themselves,
Totally.
So,
yeah, totally.
Yeah, I was never able to really capture that same exact sound. And to me, because I know what that was supposed to sound like, and it doesn't. So it's it kind of bugs me.
Yeah, that would bug me too. But you said you were using actually different. Same model but different units,
right? Because I had sold one, and so I learned a very valuable lesson from that.
Yeah.
Don't sell your stuff if you ever because you might run into issues like that. And I don't know, maybe if I saved the patch bank, which is something I probably should have done, but I don't know, I didn't think about it. I guess maybe if I had the exact patch and could load it on, it would have been fine. But I don't know.
Yeah, at least there you can make subtle adjustments and know that you're in the ballpark.
Yeah,
I had an interesting experience about a week and a half ago. So a buddy of mine upgraded to the version 2 small box Strymons, and so I got a couple of his old ones. So I got an El Capistan, which I'd never had before, and it's a really great pedal.
Oh yeah,
I have
Superb.
The Volante and a Timeline and a Dig and all that stuff. Great pedal, really enjoying that one. And the other one I got was a Blue Sky. So I mean, you can see over my shoulder there, I've got a Big Sky sitting back there that I've had for quite a long time. But it's been literally, I don't know when the Blue Sky came out, like 10 years ago at least, give or take a year, 10 years. And so I was sitting, because the Blue Sky is different, and it different algorithms, and it sets up a little bit differently. And I was sitting there with my pedals trying to dial it into the sound that I like. And one of the surprising things was like, okay, I got a sound that's pretty good here, between the two mode switches and five knobs, yeah, and got it dialed in. And so I went back onto my computer, to my Photos app, and I was like, when did I own that before? How long has it been? And I searched back to whatever it was, like 2012. I had a picture of it on my pedal board, and I kid you not, the knobs were within a millimeter, the exact same position as I had just set it up 10 years later by ear. Like I wasn't thinking about some sound I had before. I was just like, what sounds good to me? And it ended up being like ridiculously close. I think the pre-delay was like 1 or 2 millimeters off. And that was basically, I mean, verbatim right there, which is kind of a crazy thing. Now, obviously something like that, if you're a little bit off, it's not going to make as big a difference as if you're, doing several modulations onto an analog oscillator. But I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to happen. That I would have arrived at the same place, which I think is kind of a testament to how our own brain patterns are kind of, we're just working through the same stuff in the entire time, and some will change over time. But like if there's something that we like, it's not going to be such a huge thing to get back to. when you guys do record patches, like what kind of format do you do that in? Are you like writing it down, or like I do like a panorama photo over the matriarch if I think I want to save it?
Oh, you're talking to okay, yeah. Go ahead, go guys.
Aaron, take it. How do you do that?
Well, so I have a couple points I wanted to make. What Cryss did with the Blue Sky, that's been my experience with the Dig. After 1 or 2 weeks, it always ends up at the same settings, and all I do is change the timing a little bit depending on the tempo of the track. But there's like the butter setting on the Dig that I just love, and it like I've never heard a delay sound better than that, so I always end up going right to those settings. So I don't really need to write anything down because it's like a set it and forget it. Like, this is the perfect setting. This is the strength of the Dig. I've got different pedals for different types of delays. But in synthesis, especially with modular, when you have, which inevitably happens, is your modules are constantly changing, because that's just what modular does, is like the possibilities are endless. What if I put that one in there? What does that do? So this curiosity is constantly at play. So what I would do is in my DAW, I'd have the different tracks as I'm tracking along to kind of help me, like, okay, if I ever have to recreate this sound, how can I get close? So I'll rename the title of the track with the filter and then the oscillator that I used. And from there, by ear, I know that I can get close enough to recreate that if I really have to. On a rare occasion, it would be some sort of atmospheric sound that I maybe did all these crazy spaghetti magic trick of modulation to just get it to sound totally alive. Like I made a thunder sound one time, or trying to make an ocean sound, and it'd be really hard to recreate those kind of strictly sound effects, crazy laboratory type sounds. But for an ARP or a bass or a pad or a string sound, a lot of those, they're not very complex, so you could recreate them. But again, part of my reason for modular is to have how many filters can I cram in there, because that will give me more variety, and the filters can give you just a totally different tone that, I could never reproduce using the Moog filter if I originally produced it using the SEM filter. No matter what I do going through that Moog filter, it's not going to sound the same as it would through the SEM filter. So just to help myself, I would write down the filter and the oscillator, because I also had a variety of oscillators, because the oscillators don't all sound the same, even if they all say square, triangle, and saw.
What's your favorite filter? How about filter and oscillator combo? What's your favorite?
I would say oscillator-wise, it'd be man, it's hard to nail it down to a favorite.
Yeah.
I really like just the basic cheap 8 HP dope for oscillator as far as versatility, and it just has a warm tone to it. It's got a good triangle, got a really good saw. Not crazy about the square, but I don't use square a ton anyway. And then for the filters, that's another real tough one. I'd probably say the SH2 clone filter by G-Storm Electro is my favorite filter that I've ever used. That one, if that's hooked up, it ends up in pretty much every track that I would do somewhere, and it would end up in there, just because it's a really warm, dark, round filter, superb for bass, definitely for bass.
I got a question for you guys, actually. So, because of the issues that you might have recreating stuff with modular, do you guys ever use like Sample Robot or anything like that to, once you got a patch kind of dialed in, and just sample the whole range so that technically you could go back to that sound without having to repatch everything? You guys ever do that?
I don't. That would be a great, solution for sure, but I don't think I really have the dedication to do that. Like that's a whole other half day of like doing stuff that's not creating music for me, and that's going to be a problem. It's great in the long run, but like I don't know if I just don't have the patience for that. So yeah, it's that would be what you would do. Yeah, it would be to sample it and
be one hell of a sound for you.
I think so, or a lot of responsibility about the music I'm creating. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it's something I have to come back and answer to, if it's some kind of film or something where, you know, it's like you got to have that very same thing again, then that would be kind of frightening to do that in the modular world for sure. But you can just achieve so much originality in that world. So it's tempting to do, but you cannot count on just reproducing it. Yeah. But yeah, I could, you know, like sample it into machine, multi-samples, you know, something into machine, and then slightly open the filter and do it again, and then, that doesn't sound like fun.
Yeah,
that's definitely not as much fun. What about you, Aaron?
It's an interesting question because, sure, if I figured out the workflow of a quick sampling session, which I'm pretty sure I have all the tools to do it, I just never tried to, where you could say, okay, I'm just going to sample this patch real quick, and you hit a button and it goes through everything. But just thinking about everything involved, it's like, well, I know digital envelopes don't sound the same as analog envelopes. So if I sampled, you know, however long the samples are, but I want to make a shorter decay or a longer release, it's like it's not going to sound like the authentic one. So you'd almost end up creating this instrument that you started with your modular, but then you load it into some sampler that lets you add modulation and add envelopes to it. So it's like you're using the modular as the origin source, but you may not use the modular. You may create a whole track based on all your sampled patches, sampled modular patches that you made or something. But it's the philosophies. To me, it's when I'm in the modular world, that philosophy doesn't feel compatible to me. And it's kind of alludes to what Tim was getting at. It's like you're in the moment, you're doing this thing, you know that you're never going to do it again, because if you want to use a modular for something else, you're going to have to unplug all this stuff. Yeah, you could sample it and go through the pain of that, but then the sampling process is you thinking more like a robotic calculator being, whereas when you're messing with the wires and hearing the tones, you're like this totally other, you know, I don't know, cybernetic android being, whatever you want to call it. It quickly, I'm getting into philosophical territory, but it's an interesting topic.
Definitely.
Well, yeah, one is just more like having to do a task, and the other one is like using your right brain or whatever and being creative, and those are necessarily different places. And yeah, you don't want, if your creativity's flowing, I don't want even a knock on the door and the phone is off, and you know, it's like, please don't interrupt that, because you can't get that back, you know.
Now, one thing I would bounce off of Aaron there, and I would disagree a little bit about the envelope situation, because the thing is, if you have the same envelope curves, analog and digital envelopes are going to sound identical. And I think the proof of that is the way that companies like Oberheim and Sequential now are using them. Now, back in the 80s, a Juno envelopes or JX8P or something is going to be really slow because of the technology. But with today's technology, if you can match it, and the reason I'm saying this, not to be disagreeable, okay, maybe I am, but it's actually that's also another way, like if you're using a modular rig, to have a little bit of reproducibility in it, is if you are selecting certain components to be analog and certain to be digital. So if you're using the signal path of, so you've got your oscillator and your mixer and your filter and your VCA, and you're doing that in the analog world, the oscillator is going to be probably the most unstable thing, but you know, today's oscillators are not that bad. I mean, you can get to the same places, you know, but if you're using your modulation sources with digital modules, that is a way that you can have a little more reproducibility from day to day, because it's being done in the digital domain. Now, the signal path is not traveling through an envelope, a digital envelope, of course. or a digital LFO, but the LFO is, being created in the digital world, going through a conversion to analog, and then it's affecting the analog oscillator, filter, whatever you have there. So the advantage to it is if the heat has changed and the humidity and the voltage and all these kind of things that affect how a complicated patch might work. One of the advantages of having digital modulation sources is that, for that reason, that they're always going to show up sounding the same, and that kind of cuts the board down as to what the possibilities are of the random, or, well, it's just not saying random, but chaotic environmental causes of your rig sounding different. Does that make sense?
I think it's a good point, and it's a nice question to bring up, which, as far as I'm concerned, yes, an analog or digital envelope itself is irrelevant, but I was speaking in terms of, okay, if I have a patch that I've sampled and I want to maybe have the patch do double duty or use it in some slightly different context, and I might want to adjust the attack or the release, I'm never going to be able to make that sound like it would if I was adjusting the attack or release on the modular, because one of the things that I love about modular is I can manipulate the signal strength and get a whole lot more texture out of everything in the signal chain. I'm always overdriving everything in modular. It always happens. And depending on the speed of the envelope on the filter, and I would always have a filter on the amp and a filter on I'd always have an envelope on the amp and an envelope on the filter. Sometimes the same envelope doing both, sometimes two envelopes doing either one. But depending on how that envelope is shaped that's hitting the filter, I can get a very different sound, and it might sound like it's just about to fly off the rails, or it might get a nice, beautiful blat sound, or it might just hit really hard and really deep, really quickly. It's totally different. And if you made a sample of whatever that sound was and then used a sampler with just a basic digital envelope after, it's like all you're doing is adjusting the volume going in and the volume going out.
Yeah, so you're not talking about so within a purely module situation itself, the usage is going to be the same given the same envelope curves, but you're talking after the fact, after it's sampled, then you don't have the control over it, and that's where the part of doing it in the box and digitally.
The magical role that the envelopes are serving as you're creating a patch in modular, doing that after the fact, you're not going to get the nuances in texture by adjusting the envelope. That's not possible after. You're just going to be adjusting like a volume curve, and there would be no texture change with that. I suppose you could have like a filter plugin put on top of it and do it that way, but again, I've never heard a digital filter that satisfied me. It's got to be an analog filter or no filters.
Yeah. Is there anything that accurately models filter shapes like in the digital world?
Absolutely.
Right?
I mean, all these modern polysynths are doing. Marcus Ryle just did a whole. Talked to him about it in person, about how they did the digital envelopes in the OBX8. And he's like, it's at a certain point, it's identical. Like when, so in some of his comparison videos, you see he's got an original OBX and OBXA. He's like, when the vintage one is in the good conditions, like the heat and everything, it's warmed up and it's all in the right place, they sound identical. The advantage for having the digital envelopes in the new one is that it always sounds the same. So if you turn it on and you start playing it in 2 minutes, or you're playing it 45 minutes later, the envelope times are the same because heat hasn't changed the timing of the envelope at all. And if you want offsets between your envelopes, so let's say you're playing that full 8-note chord or whatever, and you want to be really tight, the digital envelopes can all be exactly the same for every note, or in the software you can vary it, and then it can be coming down in different places like an analog would. So you have the ultimate flexibility. Now on something like the Moog 1, with the envelopes, one of the nice things is it pulls up on the screen, and then you have control over not just like envelope timing, but you also can control curves as well. So, for instance, you can have like a really algorithmic attack phase, or you could have it exponential or linear, or like where vary where the places are that you want to do stuff. So maybe you want more like a Moog analog sound, and you do an algorithmic attack, an exponential release, sustain, an exponential decay, and then an exponential release also. But then maybe you want for that patch, maybe you want to have a linear VCA, things like that. So it's ultimate in flexibility. Yeah, I mean with that, so like in the 80s they got a bad rep for digital oscillators because they couldn't do it very fast, or digital envelopes, because the envelopes were very slow because of the processing power. That's what gave them the bad rap. The envelope, of course, isn't in the signal path at all. So this is a mini rant on people online that like go after, oh well, it doesn't have analog envelopes like the original. If we're talking about like something like the OBX-A or the OBX-8, yeah, like it better have that analog filter. If they put a digital filter in there, like I think everybody would be justified in just going nuts about that. But the thing that it has, the digital envelopes, is a huge advantage. There's no drawbacks to it at all because it's not in the signal path. It's not affecting the tone in itself. It's not shaping tone, but it's shaping the things that shape the tone that are all analog. So it's a brilliant way to do it with no drawbacks at all.
Is there a plug-in or a device that you or I could get that we could model envelopes? I understand that manufacturers are doing that. I'm asking, what if I come up with a shape? Is there something where I can actually store that in some way, either in a device or as a plugin?
I bet there is. I couldn't tell you, but I'm sure in the modular world there's got to be something like that where you basically draw your own envelope.
The closest thing I can think of off the top of my head is LFO tool, and I know it's a little different, but you could probably use it.
Oh, that's a good thought. Yeah.
Yeah, in the box there's a lot of stuff. I mean, if you're just dealing with modular, there are some. So the last, I think it was the last module that I bought was the WMD. I can't remember the name of it, but it's the multi-mode filter, I think it might be called. And so it's got the four knobs for the attack, decay, sustain, release, but then it has 3 knobs that control the curve of it. So you have control over the time and everything on the one set like you would normally do on an ADSR, but the other side is a lot like what the Moog 1 has, where you can just go in there and turn it. Now, the Moog 1's nice because you can see it on the screen how it's changing the shape, but on this it's just totally in the modular Euro rack world. You can get, so you can kind of cop some of the envelope sounds of other synthesizers, which is the reason that I got it, because that envelope shape. Not only the time, but the shapes are really important to kind of nailing some of those sounds. But totally. In the box that there are LFO tool, and there's another one, but I can't think the name of it. But yeah, there'd be ways to do it, and of course, so many of these programs have multi-segment envelopes where you can totally customize all your own shapes and everything. So you could bypass the envelope in a soft synth, have that running, taking the trigger off of your MIDI notes that you're inputting, and then it modulating the cutoff frequency of a plugin or the amp or whatever, and kind of work around, like kind of you're almost patching around the soft synth's own envelope to do something else with that.
Yeah, you're actually taking a situation where you're creating the waveform rather than modeling one that's pre-existing. I was just kind of curious if they're like in Modular, if you come up with a whacked and cool sounding envelope in Modular, say, if there's a way to then like model that, just the envelope part of that. You know what I mean? Like actually, like taking a picture of it in some way, right? And rather than drawing it in and then there it is. I don't know.
I'm not sure if there's a way to do a capture on that. There is a way to do it, but I don't know off the top of my head anyway of a tool that does that. But some of what I've done before, so like when I got the Moog 1, because now I have that ability, which I couldn't do on a OB6 or a Juno, I just set about recording some. Well, with one, I did as much research as I could on famous synthesizer envelopes. So I had a notebook with any sort of information I could find. So like CS80, what are the envelopes like? What are the envelope times, like max 1 second envelopes or something on that? You know, if it's in a regular condition, of course, you know, things like that. And then what is the curve? And so if people had talked about it, said, well, this has, you know, this kind of algorithmic curve, or, you know, it's more linear because it's later or whatever, I would write that information down and then start cataloging it. And then the other thing that I did was to test the synthesizers that I have here and record, you know, say like a envelope opening the filter, and to see it in my DAW, what the waveform looked like. You know, is it kind of scooping up into it, or is it a fast rise and then leveling off, or is it more linear? Doing things like that, and then also checking other. So, for instance, like with the Juno that I had, I recorded that and checked out and just spent some time listening to it. But then I also checked all the other Juno software that I had. So, you know, like Tal and Arturia and Roland Cloud, and I tried to see how they modeled it, and by playing it and looking at the waveforms to see if there was any differences. And sometimes you could tell where a manufacturer didn't like really do the full job. Like, oh, that looks pretty linear. Like they didn't even try to model the envelope curve, and others were like had done it really well. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of work to do it, but I think that's one of the more interesting areas that are probably not talked about in terms of like capturing the sound of a classic synthesizer. And when you have something like the Moog 1, which you know, the Moog 1's got a very versatile layout for an analog synth, and then you can run it into either, you know, Moog style filters or state variable. So when you're going to, like, say, try to get an Oberheim sound out of it, I need, you know, the filter that's going to sound more of the 12 decibel state variable filter. That's going to be more Oberheimish. But then if I can try to match the curves of it on the envelopes, that'll help it get a little bit closer, you know, things like that.
You're right. You've definitely done a lot of research in that. That's very cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, there's not every area that like I'd want to nerd out on stuff, but that was one of the areas that was kind of fascinating to me, that I just wanted to know more about it, because particularly I think what started it was the Moog 1. Like, well, I have all these options that I can do it within this one synth now. Let's make that work to my advantage, because one of the things that I think that one of the reasons people have panned it. So obviously they've it's taken them a while to kind of catch up on things like tuning and some of the software issues, but it's got a great
like
analog.
5 years.
Yeah, it's got a great.
They finally fixed it, guys. And I can attest. Like,
I was going to ask Marshall.
it.
I mean, what do you want for $8,000? Come on.
Yeah.
But
Well, mine was even worse, because I remember I got it in you were talking about how you can see the envelopes and everything. Mine was backwards. It was doing the opposite of what I was doing on the screen.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Anyway,
so I mean, it's got a great.
I think he had the synthesizer flipped the wrong way. You just need to rotate 180 degrees.
Standing behind it.
I just put a mirror up there.
And I'm like, what is this? This isn't showing me what I...
Yeah. So I think one of the problems was that the factory presets were damn awful. I mean, there was a handful of them. Suit and Tie guy made some great presets on there.
Yeah.
His like suitcase piano and things like that were good. There was a handful of them that were wonderful presets, but like 95% of them were just absolutely wretched sounding. And people heard that and they go, well, this is a terrible sounding synth. Like, no, you don't understand. Like, you have to get it to the place where you want to get it. And when you would go through this, when you'd go through the presets, like the first day I got it, like, oh my gosh, this doesn't sound that great. But you know, when Amos was showing stuff in the videos pre-launch, like, wow, this sounds really great, because he was doing everything from scratch. And the thing is, like, people are like, oh, you can't get like the old Moog mono sounds and stuff. Like, yeah, everyone has its, you know, a Matriarch and a Voyager and a Model D. They're not all going to sound exactly alike. Okay, so this is different. So it's going to sound a little bit different. But if you want to get into the ballpark, we'll start by doing the things that you would do for that other synthesizer, like get the filter envelope shapes right for a mini Moog. Have that dial in a little bit of hold on the filter envelope, because the envelope on a mini Moog clips. So it hits the rails and it can't go up any higher, and it clips, and it has basically a hold after you have the, let me do it towards the camera here. So, you know, the filter has the attack portion, and then, you know, usually you're waiting for it to come down kind of very smoothly like that, come to a point and then come down. But the mini Moog clips at that top part, so you dial in hold, so it kind of stays there for whatever 30 or 50 milliseconds, and then it starts the decay thing. Okay, that's putting it a little bit closer to the mini Moog there, and then gain staging and everything else. Like, well, you can get some really great classic Moog monosynth sounds out of it, but you got to do the work for it. And so that envelope part of it was just one of those puzzle pieces to go, why isn't this sound right? Well, yeah, if you're using linear envelopes on your filter,
that wasn't the biggest problem with that thing, though. Like, the gain staging was extremely important. They had a really high noise floor on it initially. Like, it was a mess. It was really a mess for quite a while. The envelopes, I don't think were the reason people were upset with it.
Well, yeah, all that, but I'm talking in terms of getting classic sounds out of it, because even when it, you know, had more problems than it does now, with the software and everything like that, you could still get great sounds out of it. But people weren't getting to that point so quickly, because they weren't utilizing those features, because they weren't used to that, thinking in those type of terms.
They should have done a few presets that did exactly that, because I think a lot of people, myself included, when I bought that Moog One, pre-ordered it without hearing it. No one knew what it was, brand new thing. I expected it to sound like some of my other Moogs, but just polyphonic, and it didn't do that at all. So it was a little
weird.
Surprising.
That's weird. I would think they would absolutely have some legacy patches in there just to go, look, it'll do that, of course, but now dig what else it'll do. That's amazing.
But look at the marketing departments of all these modern synth companies. They don't care about that stuff, really. They, you know, the way that they show stuff off, like, I mean, you got to appeal to a wide variety. So I'm not saying do something, you know, don't do anything modern at all, Roland, you know, but if you got something in your back catalog, you know, like do some.
We should do that.
You know, show off some of those old sounds in addition to the new ones.
Exactly.
Anyway, we just like went on a big long rant there. Let's bring it back around.
I think when companies do that, though, because another synth that was hurt by terrible patches is the Kyra. It's the best sounding synth I think I've ever owned.
And well, that's a pretty big praise there, because you've got a lot of great synths.
No kidding.
I love that thing. It sounds amazing. It's like you could touch the sound. It's so good. But you have to do it yourself, because there's not, you know, the presets don't really showcase that. So, and that's kind of the Moog One, a very similar situation. And I think it opens the door for sound designers like Geosynths and some of these other guys out there, guys and girls that do sound design. And so somebody should take the Moog One and make a bunch of Moog sounding classic Moog patches for it. And I think maybe that would that's a space that can be filled by somebody out there.
Definitely. That's solid. I mean, come on, that's a super solid idea. How could that not work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, interesting.
Well, yeah, Jamie did some of that with the set that they Moog hired him to do, the classic sounds. But I mean, it was not just classic Moog; it was classic, all sorts of classic songs.
Yeah, I think it was just classic vintage sounds in general.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They hired him to do. I never got the pack, so I never played with it. Anyway,
Aaron.
Yes.
What projects are you working on right now, man? What are you doing?
So I am totally into an album I'm working on right now. The title, I believe, is going to end up being Blackwood Dreamscape. So I've kind of been on this theme lately with Impurfekt, where it's like I imagine, okay, this is my version of the Silent Hill world, and then I kind of create music that I feel like fits well into that world. But I'm not trying to do a direct ripoff, and I've done a few albums called with the title Blackwood, and then it had a subtitle after that. But the interesting thing is this, what I'm working on now is kind of I had a couple different album ideas, and I spent a few weeks throwing things at the wall, and nothing ever stuck until I went back to this album idea, and now it's just been pouring out of me. So I feel like, okay, I struck pay dirt, so now I'm going to keep digging until I get, I'm going for like 10 tracks. But it's really nice to have one of those ideas come together and to have the inspiration keep flowing and the idea keep going forward.
So we've
I don't know. It's been a while. I was kind of stuck in a rut for a few months, and I finally came out of that rut. So it's a really nice place to be.
Yeah, that's awesome. You busted through it.
Yeah, we had an episode on like getting inspired and how do you get going. Like, what was it for you in this time that helped kind of push you into that new phase of creativity? Like, what about it that got you moved in your state to do that?
I think it was a combination of the hardware and something else that I don't quite, I haven't thought about enough to verbalize. But like you had mentioned earlier, Cryss, I did use exclusively software for maybe a good 6 months. And in that process, I realized something which I kind of mentioned earlier, in that when I began music using software, I was a different person. I had a lot more energy inside myself. I was younger, less experienced, less conscious of the world. So I tended to, just have a lot of pent up energy. And so there was plenty of passion and fuel inside me to create using the software that was not inspiring me at all. All the inspiration came and just poured from me into the box. And as I've grown and become wiser, and as I'm less talented at building up chaos and energy inside myself, so I find I need other things outside myself for that inspiration. So I was like, I was getting nowhere. It's like, okay, I need to go back to the hardware rig. And I went back to the hardware rig, and it kind of took me a few months to get back into that symbiosis with the hardware rig. I think that was part of it. And the other part is, I've learned this too over the years, sometimes even if I want to make a buttery smooth classic analog style album, some other part of me wants to make things dark and gritty, so I just got to go with that until that gets worked out, and then maybe I'll be ready to do the other one.
Yeah.
So right now it's the dark and gritty, and it's funny because this album seems to be getting darker and grittier as I'm going along. And I'm like, this is totally cool because it's just come pouring out of me, so I'm just going with it.
You just found the right mindset, and then those little restrictions or stumbling blocks or hurdles, right, are like they're kind of not there. All of a sudden, you're just moving along and moving through it. And you're not having to try so hard. It's just coming out, right? That sounds like, when you get in the right mindset, it's like, oh, well, that's not hard. But sometimes when you're trying to do a thing that you're, imposing on your creative process, that can be really hard, right? So it sounds like you just found the right combination of flow.
And I think any artist over time learns this process of, okay, if you're trying hard, you're probably just doing the wrong thing. It's like, well, if the stone isn't hard and immovable until you start pushing against it, and suddenly it's hard and immovable, where you can just walk around it and do something else.
Yeah.
And so in music and any creative endeavor, I'm always discovering like, well, I'll try that, and if that's not work, I'm going to try something else. And eventually you find that thing that feels natural and it just starts flowing. And at the same time, specifically with music, is getting the tools in a way that the tools don't get in the way, but that they can just become extensions of yourself. And that's a combination of knowing the tools, but also having the right tools at the same time. So, and in this case, it's like, I've got this hardware, most of it's analog, it all has patch memory. And so I don't have that concern where, okay, if I want to start this new track and maybe polish this one later, it's going to be really hard to do. Well, no, it's not hard to do. I got all the patches in there, and I know all the settings, and I just click, and boom, I'm right back there, and I can replace that whole part or make it six bars longer or whatever.
It also helps to know your equipment.
Oh yeah.
So that, you talk about, not having the tools in your way. The best way to do that is to know it. Read your manuals.
Yeah. Are you talking to me right now?
In the folder. I'm looking at my manuals like every couple days.
Yeah, that's very good advice, and it's a reason it's yet another reason not to just follow Gear of the Week, because if you spend, I thought about this. I bought a plugin this week. I bought that new Arturia distortion plugin that came out, whatever it was, today or yesterday I think. And it was cheap for me. It was only $29. That wouldn't be a big deal, but my whole thing is there are no-brainers. No-brainers are for people with no brains. Like, I seriously sat and thought about it for a moment. Like, is this going to be a tool that I'm going to work on? Because I've already got other overdrives and distortions and stuff. Okay, well, they all have some certain purpose. Others, like half of them, are crap. Just when I upgrade my computer, they're not coming over, But is it going to be something that is going to be worth investing the time in? Because I think it's easy to kind of stay at this level and you have fun by just cycling through gear. And we've all done that, and it's fun. And there's nothing inherently wrong about that, because sometimes we just need a little something new for fun. But if we're doing that all the time, it's like what Marshall said, like we're not investing the time to get the gear, the time to get to know the gear that we have, so that we're in that creative, inspirational moment, we can just go and use it. We've done the work ahead of time, reading the manual and digging all that stuff out, so that when I'm in the moment, like, I already know how to do this. I mean, there'll always be stuff I have to look up, but if we can minimize that, then I think it keeps you in the creative mind flow, creative flow, and not also the technology flow.
Right. It's also knowing what instrument does what best or well suited for your goal, because I get asked, why do you have so many pianos? And then I punch them because it's not a piano, they're synths. But the reason why is a lot of, there's little quirks, little differences, either in tone or in control or in, interface wise, and they're all different. So there's a reason to have all these, at least in my opinion.
and kind of spending time in two different worlds with guitar and bass and with synth, I gotta say, like, the guitar world is I think technically, I mean, there's technology is in both worlds, and you can do all sorts of stuff, but just on average for the kind of rig that I have with guitar, pedals, vacuum tube amps, guitars, I can get a new guitar, and if it's a brand that I've never had before or a style, it's not a big deal. Like, in 20 minutes I figured it out. Like, I'm playing guitar and I know how this sounds, and I know how it's going to work in my amp, all that stuff. But with synthesizers, really seems to be exponentially more information that you have got to know per synthesizer of how it performs, because you have all these variables. I think with guitar, it's more about ends up being a lot about the player and the touch, and certainly when you're making music, the player of a keyboard also. But when you're doing the sound design, it's so much quicker on the guitar versus synthesizer that's again one area that you want to know the stuff you have.
Yeah.
Great point.
Well, I think it's probably about wrap-up time here. Do we want
so
to,
well, let's how about, what are you guys doing this week, and then maybe we'll close the show out with a little bit of Aaron's other project, Point Surrender.
sounds good.
Yes, yeah, let's do that for sure.
What do you got going on, Aaron?
I'm still working on my album, making good progress on another track, and I did record another filter demonstration on the SC3X. I've been going through all the different. There's 6 or 7 different filter circuits in there, and I have a video that'll post on my YouTube channel, I think Friday night or Saturday night, of the 6 decibel Juno circuit. So that'll be dropping in a few days. And in the meantime, I'm gonna keep working on new music and enjoying it.
The Blackwood project, is that what you're calling it?
Yeah. Once I finish all the tracks, which I'm kind of putting early mixes on YouTube just to give people something to check out, and then once I get about 10 tracks, then it'll become more solidified, and I'll probably post like a little demo reel that, I don't know, if I feel like it, I might do a little more interesting video along with that, and but it's done when it's done, which is, it's nice when I'm the boss.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
How about you, Tim?
I think really, aside from just any session work that might come through the door in the next couple of weeks, it's mostly going to be learning this new gear, and like, I just bought a Varigate 8 Plus sequencer for Modular, and I, it's not extremely intuitive. So I've already, I got it kind of making a couple of sounds, but I've got a lot to learn and figure out, and then, hopefully write some good music with all this. So I really think that's mostly going to be my challenge for the next couple of weeks, is just to do whatever work that comes through the door anyway, and then, get this gig together, and then yeah, tomorrow is another Pin Jones Conspiracy Day to track. Hopefully we'll have 7 tracks either finished or really, really close, and then it's off to Mix World.
Nice. We'll be looking forward to hearing some of that.
Cool, yeah, it's coming up pretty cool.
Yeah. How about you, Marshall?
Well, I'm going to be anxiously awaiting the arrival of the OBX8, and in the interim, I'm going to see if I can get this album ready to go and pushed out. And then I've got, I'm still working on my live rig. I'm still doing I still have some, some tracks that are still sitting around that I need to work on too. So I don't know. Hopefully I get around to some of that, a little bit of everything over the next week. That's my goal anyway.
Nice.
Your label is Overclocked, right? Is that where your label is?
Yeah, it's called Overclocked Music.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep,
Excellent.
and I've set up 24/7 audio and video stream on that now. So real time stuff.
Oh,
Is
nice.
this like you brushing your teeth and stuff, or?
No, it's just like a Shoutcast audio playlist that I've got set up. I want to do other stuff with it, but I'm figuring out how to get all those servers set up and running and have them be stable and everything has been a little challenging. And then I want to integrate like some kind of chat feature, whether it's IRC or something else. I need to build another server for that. So it's still kind of in the dev phase, and I'm just slowly working on it when I have time.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
So after all the hard work we do, I got to tell you, like, so my buddy, one of my best friends is a dentist, and so he said his office has all sorts of social media stuff, and he told his office staff, go around and record ASMR stuff for Instagram. And so he made a video out of it, like, whatever it is, 20 or 30 seconds or something. It's got 5 million views.
Wow.
Yeah.
And we're working our ass off with analog synthesizers. And
Right. Right.
We're not. It's
Right.
like,
we're doing it wrong. All right.
yeah, but you know what? We are doing it right because we're doing it for the love of it, and that's the key thing. Is I think maybe at some point we should talk about like social media and that kind of stuff on the show, and popularity and those type of issues, because it can really be a little bit distracting having to try to cater to that when you're just wanting to make music that you love. So, well, for me, I'm just trying to get back to my life together here. So I've been doing what I can of housework and playing guitar, which, so one of the bummers is I haven't gotten to play a whole lot of synthesizer, but also it was nice because I really needed to spend some time brushing up on guitar, and then having a new guitar has been a lot of fun too. So, as time goes on, I got a lot of stuff that I got a beta test this week, and imagine that's going to take up probably most of my free time or time I have energy for. So that'll be good, but I am looking forward to, getting through some of this stuff and actually working on a track sometime soon. So we'll see. Hopefully soon. All right, let me put on a little something from Aaron's project Point Surrender, and we'll see you out. We'll just let this play for a minute or so, and hope everyone in the chat has a good evening. Thanks to everybody for coming, and also for chatting with us and kind of sharing your experiences with all of this. Again, this is a collective, so it's not just us talking about it, but all of us together learning from one another. So have a good evening, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.
Just realized I was sharing the wrong screen there. I was like, why isn't it playing?